I do know that I live in a poetic consciousness and I live in a mythic consciousness. And in times like this, that is a radical proposition. So, my friends, I suppose I would ask us, what is our wild way of telling the truth? Hello there, and welcome to Jawbone. It would have been well over 10 years ago that I was sitting in a pub on the Thames River in London, the smoky old Thames, with the great actor Mark Rylance and my friend, the theatre director Matthew Burton. And I don't know if it was the beer that put the idea in Mark's head, but suddenly this look of pure mischief came over him, and he said, "Come with me." And he took us next door. Now, what was next door? Next door is still to this day the Globe Theatre, Shakespeare's Globe, rebuilt in the 1990s, and Mark was director of it for 10 years. And because Mark was director of it for 10 years, he knows all sorts of wonderful, magical little secrets and quick routes in and out. And he took us through a little door in the wood that I really wouldn't have spotted. And that led us through rooms that got smaller and smaller and more filled with theatrical kit until finally we were travelling upwards and suddenly, Lord have mercy, we were on the stage of the Globe Theatre. No roof, remember, so there was 100,000 stars overhead. La Luna, the yellow breast of the moon, was there gazing down at us. Well, with a bit of puff inside us and a bit of puff, I mean, like, enthusiasm, excitement, and some beer inside us, we did what Van Morrison, I suppose, would suggest we do: Poetic Champions Compose. I think that's the title of one of his albums, or like it. So for about an hour, more or less, there were poems flying about and bits of stories and anecdotes from Mark. I remember he told me a story of the great storyteller, my favourite really, Billy Connolly, being there once. But the thing that Mark told me that stuck in my head was that back in Shakespeare's day, you needed to do two things as a storyteller. You needed to have a story compelling enough to keep the folks in the cheap seats riveted to the spot. And these are people that are working on the markets and haven't got much money and are just coming in and they're just willing you on, standing actually, not sitting. But then up in the higher places, in the balconies, there were these kind of Elizabethan professional word collectors, people that would go along and listen to the new plays and collect the turns of phrase that whoever Shakespeare was coming up with, and they'd take it back to their patron, who would then gradually incorporate it into their language. So these two things are happening at the same time: a really riveting story, but fresh, startling, inventive speech. And the braided knot of that has never left me. I've always been really interested in it. Celtic love poems in the Celtic world, the bardic world, is filled with effusive speech. It's filled with wonder of nature. It's filled with grandeur. It's filled with grief. And actually, although these days we use the word bard to describe generally what I would imagine as a kind of inspired rural figure with flames emanating from them, a kind of astral week's consciousness in them, a bard isn't really what you wanted to be if you were a trained poet. You wanted to be something called an olav, which is a much higher rank. But even to be a bard, you had to have under your wingspan, in your crane skin bag, you had to have at least 60,000 lines of memorized verse. And often there would be bardic competitions between who would become the Olav. And what I want to talk a bit about today is beautiful speech. What's that all about? Why is it important? Why is beauty important to almost all cultures of antiquity? What does it do to our heart? And so I'll read you something called the Dialogue of the Two Sages. And it is basically a competition between two bards for the position of Olav, chief bard. Now, 99% of what you're about to hear will make very little sense. My friend John Matthews calls it dark speech. The way the bards would compete was in a kind of imagistic, knotted, interiorized language that only a few other people understood. It was very elite in a way, but it's still fascinating to hear it. So I'll read a bit of it. It comes from my book, The Night Wages. I've just dropped my glasses. I picked my glasses up, you'll be pleased to know. And the font should have been a bit bigger in this book, as we shall see, as I am putting my specs on to read this to you. So this is two bards. One is young, one is older, competing for the same spot. And at a certain point, for reasons that you and I will not recognise, one has prevailed. So this is the older speaking to the younger. A question, O bird of dark speech, from where have you come? Younger one. Not hard to answer, from the heel of a sage, a gathering of wisdom. Goodness is perfection, from the bright sunrise, from the hazels of poetic skill, where righteousness is learnt and falsehood fails, where colours are witnessed and poems are made vivid and fresh. And you, my senior, where do you come from? The older. Not hard to answer. I have flown over the columns of the ages and the streams of Leinster, over the elf mound of Nectan's wife, the forearm of Nuada's wife, from the land of the sun and the dwelling of the moon, from the navel string of youth. A question, O lad of language, what is your name? Well, I am anger of fire and fire of speech, noise of knowledge and wellspring of wealth, sword of song. And you, my elder, what is your name? Elder, not hard to answer. I am most accurate in divination. I am champion of interrogation, inquirer of science and weft of art, a casket of poetry and all the abundance of the sea. A question, O young instructor, what art do you practice? Younger, I foster poetry and diffuse knowledge. I search for fame and I woo science. My speech is the cattle of a sage. I bring tales as slick as my black feathers that delight all sophisticated kings. And you, my professor, what do you practice? I establish peace and I celebrate art. I hunt for support of kings. I inflame the fury of inspiration, but promote tidy structure of mind. I love that. I promote tidy structure of mind, the art of a small poem with clear arrangement and a celebrated road. A question, young evangelical, what is your quest? The younger. To walk the plains of age after the mountains of youth, to walk between candle and fire, battle and horror, to dwell most deeply within the streams of knowledge. And you, ancient one, what is yours? To have knowledge and carry in my breast the skill of poetic revision, to come to my death with abundance of honours. And you, spring morning, on what path have you come? Not hard to answer. The white track of knowledge through the curls of a king's beard, on the back of a ploughing ox, on the dew of a goddess, both corn and milk, of course. And you, dusk of magnificence, on what path have you come? Oh, I have come on the breasts of soft women and the head of a spear, on a gown of silver, on a chariot with no need of wheels, on the three ignorances of the Machindoch, and a question, youthful river, for whose son are you? Not hard to answer. I am the lad of poetry. Poetry is son of close attention. Close attention is son of meditation. Meditation is son of law. Law is son of inquiry. Inquiry is son of investigation. Investigation, son of great knowledge, which is the son of understanding, which is the son of wisdom. Wisdom being son of the three gods of poetry. And you, full moon standing, whose son are you? Oh, the older one now. Not hard to answer. I am son of the man who has been and was not yet born, buried in his mother's womb and baptized after death. At this, and for no reason that us as watchers can quite figure, the dialogue completely halts. The younger. I know you are the wisest of prophets, and you carry poetry's hazels in your beak. And I know that God has brought you here, and I bow before you. Amazing, eh? I've been puzzling over the dialogue of the two sages for 30 years now. I lived in a tent for 4 years and I thought of very little else. It's a good thing, maybe, don't have screens anymore, don't have computers, don't come look at me here. Just go and take those words and think about them for maybe 4 weeks or 4 months or 4 years. It exists in this book, The Night Wages, that I wrote. Now, one of the greatest poets I've ever met was a man called Tony Hoagland. And Tony and I were close. We did a book called Cinderbiters together. And Tony was an astonishment to me. Tony just dropped out of heaven, really, for me to have a friendship with. He's just my kind of thing. He was outrageous, actually. He was absolutely outrageous. But I met Tony and we had about 10 years of friendship together, I think. I loved him dearly. But Tony died. And when Tony was dying, he was out in New Mexico. And we wanted to do one last event together. So Christmas, about 8 years ago, I came over. And he was well enough for me to see him for a few hours a day, and the rest of the time he needed to rest. And so while he was where he was and while I was waiting for him in the desert, I wrote The Night Wages. So I think of Tony when I think about poetry. Why does poetry matter? Why do beautiful words matter, even when we don't understand exactly what is going on? I would have come to poetry. My dad is a lover of poetry, but I really came to it myself, I suppose, when my heart was first broken as a teenager and the enormity of what had happened. There was a disclosure of the heart that was bigger than just a girl with a longing for a liking of Slayer gigs and stripy tights. It was more going on than that, even though I frantically projected onto her that she was the woman at the very edge of the world, as we say in myth. And in a way she was, but in a way she definitely wasn't. So you need poems, you need deep, powerful things. You need to say, when someone says, did she dump you? You say, well, yesterday all the crows came to live on my house. And something of the import of that experience lands with significant weight and heft. Lots of teenagers listen to The Doors for similar reasons. Lots of teenagers to this day still read W.B. Yeats for this reason. But I found a poem of Tony's today from a very late book of his, Recent Changes in the Vernacular. It's a book about having cancer. And I'll read you this one, because this is a really different way of writing. You don't need to write like you've swallowed a thesaurus. You just need to find your wild way of telling the truth. And this was Tony's. It's called Bliss. Here I am, sick in the winter again. I'm not interested in food or rest, not in reading or entertainment, not in doing the minimum things to care for myself, like squeezing oranges or keeping my feet warm. Sickness, I sometimes think you are my Jerusalem, my holy land, the country to which I have always belonged. You make me still and wide inside. I have always been talented at you. Over the winter fields, the sky is pale and grey and slashed diagonally across by bars of charcoal blue. It has a way of being silent that is much like speech. Splashes of egg white and lime strewn carelessly about. I have always wished that people would offer me more sympathy. I've always wished that people would offer me more sympathy. I have always preferred to be hidden from view, to be excused from duty like a child lying on his side in bed, watching through a window as the big ships pass. Look, something buried under the earth has made its way up through all the layers and the years. Look, it reaches the surface and is released. My hands are cold as I write this, and the skin of my face hurts. Using my inhaler with the red cap, shaking it first as if to wake the little god inside, I suck the aerosol into my lungs like champagne. I suck the aerosol into my lungs like champagne. There's a million ways to do it. There's a million ways to write poems, like there are a million ways to tell stories, as many as there are critters on the planet, or weather patterns, or dream sequences. What will yours be? What will be your form of speech? Some people find a way in with Bukowski. Some people find a way in with the late poems of Mary Oliver. Beautiful, those late poems of Mary Oliver. But if, like me, I believed for some time that poetry was not for me, I think it's Eliot that says, I do not think the mermaids will sing for me. I thought it was some specialised, rarefied form. But what I would suggest is you get a luminous pen, probably from a post office, and find a few anthologies of poetry if you're interested, and notice the moment in the poems where your heart lifts. It doesn't mean everything sifts to complete understanding, but it just lifts in some way. And when that happens, take that beautiful new book of yours, get your big ugly luminous pen out and underline it, and then fill in the sides with wild speculation about what is happening inside you at that moment. Make an interior contact and an interior contract between you and the poem. And what happens then is the poem starts to teach you, it starts to educate you, it starts to walk where you walk, and you are not alone in this world after all. I read a lot of poetry now. Sometimes people say that I would be a poet. It's not a phrase that I would ever use about myself. Seamus Heaney always said that poetry is to be a poet, it's a praise word. And it's a bit gauche if you use it about yourself. Now, if somebody keeps piling that word on you, then, well, that's what that is. But I do know that I live in a poetic consciousness, and I live in a mythic consciousness. And in times like this, that is a radical proposition. So, my friends, I suppose I would ask us, what is our wild way of telling the truth?